Welcome to the pod. Got a special one today because we are previewing the returning Fantasy Fix on your speakers throughout the NFL season and all across the Sunshine State. Zac Blobner, he pilots those shows. I try and do my best to not crash the plane every Sunday. 7 years, if I'm right, that we've been doing this now, entering this season.
Yeah, that feels right. I mean, that's what
we're always guessing what the number is. Every year, it's just like, let's just throw one against the wall. No one's counting.
I know it's more than 5, but it's less than 10. So we're somewhere in the middle there. And hopefully I think we need to set it at 7 so that when we get to a decade, whether it's legitimate or not, we can at least celebrate a little bit at 10 years.
Let's settle on 7. Let's confidently say this is entering year 7. And then we'll get to that 10-year mark here soon. So we're back at it in a couple of days, and I just hope to kind of preview in a condensed form the season that is to come. There's a lot of variables with fantasy football. There's always variables with this show. Who do we like? Who do we not? Who are we stuck with? Who do we trade for? What do you guys end up sending in? There are certain names that tend to pop up every single week just based on who our devoted listeners end up investing in. So all of those things are variables, but invariably, we end up in the same sort of predicaments every single year. Week 1, I want you to remind the folks, give it to me the Zac Blobner trademark for how they should be handling their starting lineups.
Start your studs. Start your studs. Start your stars. You drafted this team. You feel great about this team. And I think there's no better, example of obviously having that opening game to look at where Xavier Worthy was able to go off for, 2 touchdowns, but that's a rookie, even though it's in the Chiefs offense. And if you started him, good for you. And I know there was a lot more people complaining that they didn't last night. I was one of them. And I don't feel bad. Because it wasn't the right move. You don't start a rookie that you took a little bit later on that you're hoping pops this year. You start your stars, you start your studs, you start your guys that, we've seen that you expect. And that's not to say don't start any rookies. Like if you took Marvin Harrison Jr. in the first round, you're banking on that dude. But you start your studs, you start your stars, and you don't feel bad if you get it wrong because week 1 is a feeling out process. Just like in the real NFL, Brandon, the teams that you don't necessarily lose the season because you lose week 1. You're trying to get rolling. You're trying to see where you're at, and then you start to make some moves and decisions after that.
Yeah, and Xavier Worthy is a perfect example of this because I have seen that too. People upset. Oh, no, he's on my bench. Don't be upset he's on your bench. Be happy he's on your team. This guy is clearly going to be a stud throughout the course of the season.
Preach.
So you want? I think I would advise people. I agree with you. I think throughout the season, you and I start to differ a little bit about the start your studs trademark. But week 1, I'm totally with you. You drafted these guys to be starters. Start the guys that you drafted to be starters. And no matter how many times we say that to people, we will still get start-sit questions, and we do appreciate it. So don't get that confused. But I would just say if you leave points on your bench week 1, just be happy that they're there. Like if you drafted Isaiah Likely, how happy and you didn't start him. Nobody started Isaiah Likely. He's on the waiver wire in I think every league that I'm in, but I know that he was a popular sleeper for some. Mm-hmm. I think he's on teams out there. If you've got him on your bench, how good do you feel if you have Isaiah Likely right now, even if that's 30 points that's sitting on your pine?
Yeah, you feel fantastic. And I'll be honest, that was one that I just didn't understand. People were talking him up. They were talking about how he could be the main target in the Baltimore offense when it comes to the passing attack. I just didn't get it. I was like, you got Mark Andrews. I understand he's an injury-riddled player, but he's a top 10, arguably top 5 tight end when he is healthy. And by all accounts, he is heading into this season. So, yeah, I thought Isaiah Likely was like a good sleeper handcuff. But the fact that there were some folks in the deep doldrums of fantasy talking about this guy as a potential weekly starter, regardless of Andrews, I thought was nuts. But it was one of those random storylines that you hear and you look at that actually hit week 1 and you're ready to roll week 1. And look, again, I think you can pivot. If you have, let's say you have Kyle Pitts, right, dealing with the hammy injury. You probably took him a hell of a lot earlier. Let's say he comes out week 1 and either doesn't play because he's hurt or he does and he looks like the same Kyle Pitts we've been drafting the last few years. Yeah, okay, plug in Isaiah Likely moving forward. That'd be my opinion, and we can get to next week when we get to next week. But Like that's just like Xavier Worthy. Be happy you have him, and it gives you options as you move forward, not just for who you want to start, but trades, because those are always on the horizon too.
Oh, yeah, and he's probably going to be a really good trade candidate if you can land him mostly on the waiver wire. Because, again, I feel like I play fantasy with a lot of people that know what they're doing, and he's not drafted anywhere in leagues that I'm in. How much fab are you dropping on Isaiah Likely when we get there? If you could drop a percentage on it.
Yeah, so most leagues, right, have like the 100 fab credit that they work with. I would say for me, and it depends on your other starting tight end, right? Like you probably drafted it as a starter. I wouldn't bail on any starting tight ends. You know, if you have Mark Andrews, you probably should put down, I'd say like 20% of your fab budget for a guy like Isaiah Likely. Because listen, that's the only scenario where I'd probably put out actual, credit that could help me in the future. Because I think the only teams that are maybe in trouble are the ones with Mark Andrews. It depends on how much you're into him. Every other one, I probably wouldn't spend more than like 10% of the budget. And again, that's if you need a starting tight end.
And do not drop Mark Andrews, okay?
No.
Don't drop Mark Andrews, but picking up Isaiah Likely feels like a good idea. It is amazing. Every single year, no matter how much draft prep we do, there's always a guy week one that bursts onto the scene and becomes a full-blown star. Last year it was Puka Nacua. We're one game in as of this recording. One game in, and we already have that guy in Isaiah Likely. It is amazing. And there's going to be more players that you didn't even think about that you will be dying to get on your roster, and players that you drafted in rounds 3 and 4, you'll want to ditch them so fast. It's amazing how quickly all this changes. Week one is always different than all the other weeks. We talk about that all the time. So I do think you want to overvalue some of those pop performances, because sometimes that stuff sticks. And when it does, you don't get another shot at these players. So this is a state of Florida show. We're all across the state: Miami, Orlando, Tampa. So which of the state of Florida players did you invest in most in fantasy football this year? Who are you planting the flag on inside of the state?
Jr.
There he is.
Brian Thomas Jr., Jacksonville Jaguar, rookie wide receiver. You want to talk about Xavier Worthy going off? It was harder for me to leave Brian Thomas Jr. on my bench, which I will do in every league this first week. And I think he's going to have a big game. He's going up against a Miami team that's known for scoring a lot of points, which means if that's the case and they are healthy on that side of the ball, the Jags are also going to have to score a lot of points as well. So you just got to expect kind of a shootout there. And then on the other side of it, the Dolphins have a bunch of banged up cornerbacks. Jalen Ramsey doesn't look healthy. And I think that you saw throughout preseason. I was on this guy. I had a draft at the beginning of preseason just because of logistics. We wanted to get the league together, and we weren't able to later. So we had to do it early. We did it after, I think, the first preseason game. And I was on him then. And then after a couple games, some joint practices, his stock went through the roof. But he's a guy, Brandon, that I truly think can be like a weekly starter in this league. And I think he's going to be a big reason why Trevor Lawrence maybe isn't as frustrating at the quarterback position as he's been for teams that have owned him in the past. So that's the guy. And a lot of that is value too. Like, that's not to say I don't love Devon Achane or, love a guy like Mike Evans. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. for the value you're going to get and where he's going is a guy that I'm high on.
I mean, if you're that high on him in week one, we might need to have a conversation come Sunday about who else you're starting over him with confidence. I will say, and I think you and I both agree about handling it this way, especially now that sports betting is legalized in Florida. And oh, by the way, we have our proud title sponsor, Hard Rock Bet. So happy to have them on board. If you have a player that is on your bench that you're so confident is going to blow up, but you don't want to bench any of your starters, great time to play some props, by the way. So, Zach, if you don't start Brian Thomas Jr., you got to at least bet his props. That way you don't totally lose out if he does indeed blow up. Get me the anytime touchdown on Brian Thomas Jr.
100%. It's a great point. I haven't looked at his props yet. Ironically, I feel like I would have at this point. It's so
they have
crazy.
To be priced fairly because he hasn't played in the NFL yet. So whatever the number is, you're probably going to feel pretty comfortable with it.
Well, and we've been very blessed this time around because we get a Friday night football game too with the Packers and Eagles. So like I was so uber focused on the opener. I'm uber focused on that game in Brazil, assuming like something crazy doesn't happen. I don't know why they're playing there, but that's a different chat for a different show. And then you have a full slate of college football with some awesome matchups on Saturday. By the time we get into Sunday slate and we're full fantasy, like this weekend, and given we're here, we've arrived. It's going to be a lot of this year, the rest of the way, the next 5 months. But this weekend specifically, Brandon, like it's like being at a buffet and knowing you don't have any room left. You're going to go back for another plate, though, because the food is so damn good. That's going to be us on Sunday. We're going to be full. We're going to be like ready to throw up from the amount of football we've consumed. And you and I are going to look at each other and go, we got 2 more plates in us, baby. And we're going to get back to work. And that's going to be the Sunday slate.
I'm going to Joey Chestnut the crap out of this football slate. You ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen nothing. My state of Florida, guys, by the way, the Dolphins backfield. I'm all in on this. I saw enough last year. I love what Mike McDaniel does with that running game. I think it's what he does best as a play caller. Raheem Mostert led the league along with Christian McCaffrey in overall touchdowns last year. Devon Achane was like Marshall Faulk level efficient at running back. Can he stay healthy is the question. And the guy I have rostered on every single team, the only single player across anywhere in the country that I have on every roster is Jalen Wright, because I was able to basically get him for free at the end of drafts, especially if you have Achane or Mostert. And then you pair him. Jalen Wright was my preseason darling. So this guy, if one of those two goes down, Achane is constantly hurt. Mostert's 32 years old and has a rich injury history. If we're being honest with ourselves, I think they're going to be great when they're on the field. Somebody's going down, Zach. So I think Jalen Wright is going to be a guy, maybe not the first month of the season, but we're going to end up talking about him.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think, again, I became victim of the fact that I do live in the Sunshine State. That's why, like you said, a little home base for us here. Everybody in my league, or every league, has multiple people that are Dolphins fans. He was never going to make it to me. That's the thing, too, where it gets interesting. Because if you believe in a guy so much and you think he's going to be good, and again, for me, it was Brian Thomas Jr., like, you're going to reach on him a little bit compared to where his ADP is at, but how much, right? And then if that's a team that you're a fan of, like, I'm not a Jags fan, so I would say if I was, maybe I go in even another round sooner or later, or sooner than I would have. So, yeah, Jalen Wright went so early in so many leagues, and I still like where he went, but I wasn't going to reach on him. But that's a guy I believe in. I really do, and I think there's a reason everybody's talking about him, and I do think he's going to start some games this year.
Let's wrap talking some rookie quarterbacks, because we got a few starting in week 1. I think fading rookie quarterbacks from a betting perspective is a solid strategy. I've been on Tennessee for a month now, going up against Caleb Williams at +4.5. But in fantasy, we got 3 newbies. Any concern here with starting those guys? And I mean, more so with Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. I don't think people are rushing to start Bo Nix, but with those guys or the guys that are catching passes from them, is there any pause for you? The first 2 picks in the draft, Heisman Trophy winners. Any issue with those 2 players this week?
Yes. I think more on the Jaden Daniels side, because he is going to run a little bit more, so he's going to be more electric. That makes him more prone for injury, though, and I don't like his weapons nearly as much, right? Like Scary Terry, sure. Obviously, there's some other players around that team that, like, they're going to be drafted, but none of them, in my opinion, are like sexy or jumping off the page.
Yeah, Dotson's gone.
Dotson's gone, who I liked. I thought that was a weird move for them. But to see him kind of in there, and Dan Quinn, defensive-minded guy. I know Cliff Kingsbury's in charge of the OC now, but they brought in the former guy, I think it was Brian Thomas from the Eagles too. So it's going to be like a smorgasbord of who's running that offense and how they're running it. And I think Jaden's going to be a fun player, but like I'd be terrified about starting in week 1, especially against the Bucs at home. Todd Bowles' defense blitzes a ton. That's a guy I definitely would be wary of. I would kind of sit on Jaden. Hopefully you didn't draft him to start him week 1. He was more of like a contingency plan. Caleb, I think you just let it ride, right? Like that offense is so ready to go. And I don't think he's going to be nearly as much in harm's way as a guy like Jaden Daniels. Not that Caleb can't get on the run if he has to, but he's going to be handing that ball off. He's going to be throwing it around to the plethora of weapons that he has, not just at receiver, but Cole Kmet at tight end as well. So I think it's very different with those 2 guys. Bo Nix is a stash too. But yeah, Caleb, you fire ahead week 1 like he's been there before.
I think the rookie quarterbacks are the outlier to the Start Your Studs program that we put into place in week 1. Because those guys were drafted consistently ahead of guys like Jared Goff and Tua and Trevor Lawrence, pretty much clean across the board in every draft. Yet I would start all those players over those rookies this week. But I took those rookies. Like, I have Caleb Williams. I have a league, Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence. I took Lawrence several rounds after I drafted Caleb Williams, and assuming that the weather holds up, I'm starting Trevor Lawrence over Caleb Williams. I agree that he's probably more set up for a good game week 1 than Jaden Daniels is, given the Bulls and the Bucs defense aspect, but I just want to stay away from these rookie quarterbacks. I want to stay away from rookies as much as I can in week 1, despite the fact that we just saw Xavier Worthy go off.
Yeah, and another thing that I'm afraid of from a fantasy perspective, but not real life, at least with Caleb in that squad, is like people that drafted DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze. Like, what do you do with those guys? You're going to have to plug them in. And one of those guys is going to give you a goose egg this week. Like, you just know one of those 3, maybe 2 of those 3, right? Depending on how good the offense looks. That's a tough part. And there's a few teams like that this year. I think about the Texans too, right? With Stephon Diggs, Collins, and Dell. Like, what do you do? What do you do in those situations? I tried my best to avoid drafting any players that were just on offenses that I felt like were almost too set up. Not to say that there aren't leagues where I took the later guys like a Tank Dell. I got Stephon Diggs later in the league because both the other 2 went off before him. I didn't really buy much stock in the Bears receivers because, again, I think it's just going to be so tough week to week to bank on who's going to be the star.
That is going to be a delightful conversation come Sunday because there are some interesting wide receiver rooms. Catch Zach and I this Sunday and every Sunday throughout the NFL season on the Fantasy Fix, 10 to 11 a.m. Cannot wait to get after it, Zach. Full buffet on Sunday.
Oh, Fantasy Fixed. We're going to break it just so we can fix it again. It's going to be a blast. Not just Sunday, Brandon. All season, baby.
That's right. That's right. And presented by Hard Rock Bet. So thanks for hopping on board for that, and we'll chat on Sunday.